Imagine living next to someone who smiles at you every morning, while hiding a darkness so deep it could destroy everything you love. Tonight, we step inside the mind of a man whose obsession blurs the line between love and terror. Watch closely, because once you see the truth, you'll never look at ordinary faces the same way again. And if this story grips you like it did me, there's plenty more waiting. Just keep watching. Ethan sat in the kitchen, staring at the ticking clock on the wall. The house was quiet except for the sound of the refrigerator humming and the faint buzz of the street lamp outside. Claire wouldn't be home for another hour. He knew that because he had memorized her schedule. He always did. From the outside, they looked like a perfect suburban couple. 2 cars, a neat lawn, friendly smiles when the neighbors waved. But Ethan knew the truth, and the truth had been eating him alive for months. He swirled the whiskey in his glass and watched the ice cubes melt into amber water. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, smiling at someone who wasn't him. Every time she said she was working late. Every time she came home smelling of a cologne he didn't own. He felt it, the betrayal. He had found the messages 2 weeks ago. Innocent at first, little jokes, emojis. Then late-night texts, long ones. Then pictures. He hadn't confronted her. Not yet. Ethan didn't do impulsive. Not anymore. Had learned that control was everything. Control kept the neighbors from knowing what he thought about them. Control kept him from screaming at the barista when they got his order wrong. Control kept him from wrapping his hands around Claire's throat the night she came home with a new necklace she claimed was just a gift from a friend. He finished the whiskey in one swallow. The warmth spread down his chest, but it didn't calm him. Nothing did anymore. He stood, carried the glass to the sink, and set it down without a sound. He liked silence. Silence was honest. When Claire finally walked in that night, she smiled at him. "Hey, you're still up." Her hair was perfect, makeup fresh, as if she had been out somewhere nice. "Yeah," Ethan said, forcing his lips into what passed for a smile. Couldn't sleep. She kissed his cheek absent-mindedly and went to the bedroom, humming softly. Ethan stayed where he was, his hands on the countertop, staring at the faint lipstick mark she had left on his face in the reflection of the kitchen window. That night, as she slept next to him, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling. He could hear her breathing, slow and steady, the sound of someone who had no idea her husband was imagining what her last breath might sound like. The next morning, Ethan followed her routine with precision. Coffee, toast, a casual kiss on the forehead before she left for work. Then, as soon as she was gone, he sat down at the dining table with her phone in front of him. She never locked it. He scrolled. Her lover's name was Daniel, a gym trainer. Of course, the messages were worse now. They weren't even hiding it. Daniel told her he loved her. Claire told him she was going to leave Ethan soon. Ethan smiled. For the first time in weeks, he actually smiled. Leaving him? No, that wasn't going to happen. He stood up, slid the phone back where he found it, and went down to the basement. The air smelled damp and earthy down there, kind of smell that never quite left the walls. He turned on the single dangling bulb, casting long, sharp shadows. This place would do. He walked the perimeter, running his hand along the concrete. He imagined Claire down here, her voice echoing against the walls, screaming until her throat gave out. Nobody would hear her. He sat on the bottom step and let the idea settle in his mind. He could do it. No, he would do it. But not tonight. Not tomorrow. Ethan was a patient man. He would wait, plan, prepare. And when the time was right, when she least expected it, the silence she left in this house would finally match the silence in his head. That night, he went to bed earlier than usual. Claire curled up next to him, scrolling on her phone. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly. "Just tired," Ethan whispered. He turned off the lamp and closed his eyes. But inside, he wasn't tired at all. Inside, he was wide awake, counting down the days. Ethan woke up before dawn, his eyes snapping open as if pulled by invisible strings. Claire was still asleep, one arm draped across his chest. He stared at her hand for a long time, feeling its weight, its warmth. How strange, he thought, that something so small could have caused so much destruction. He carefully moved her arm aside and got out of bed without a sound. Downstairs, the house was silent. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. No one ever looked through his things. Claire didn't care enough to snoop. He drew a line down the page and began to write. Step 1. Study the routine. He knew Claire's schedule, but he needed to be precise. He followed her for a week, like a shadow. Watched her leave work. Watched her stop by the cafe on the corner. Watched her meet Daniel in the parking lot 3 streets over. They never saw him. Ethan was good at being invisible. At night, he sat on the couch with a beer while Claire texted her lover, smiling at her phone. Ethan smiled too. He liked seeing her happy now. It meant she would never suspect a thing. Step 2, the alibi. It had to be perfect. No sloppy mistakes. No witnesses. He started going to the gym after work, striking up casual conversations with the staff. Friendly, approachable Ethan. The kind of guy who might be remembered later when the police asked where he was. He even left receipts in obvious places, gas stations, grocery stores, creating a breadcrumb trail that would make him look like a grieving husband, not a murderer. Step 3, the weapon. Ethan wasn't stupid. Guns were loud. Knives were messy. He needed something quiet, something clean. He walked the aisles of the hardware store, running his hand over the tools until he found what he was looking for, hammer. Simple, effective. He paid in cash. At home, he hid it in the basement behind a stack of paint cans. Every time he went down there, he checked to make sure it was still there. Just touching the handle sent a shiver up his spine. Step 4, the disposal. This was the tricky part. Killing was easy. Making her disappear was harder. Ethan considered the river 2 miles away, but it was too public. He thought about the landfill, but cameras might catch his car. Then he remembered the old well behind the abandoned farm near the county line. Nobody went there anymore. He had gone once as a teenager, dared by friends to peer into the darkness. The memory still made him smile. He drove out there one afternoon, just to check. The place was empty, the well covered by a rotting wooden lid. Perfect. Step 5, wait. This was the hardest part. Every night, Claire came home and smiled at him. Every night, he made dinner, listened to her laugh, nodded at the right moments. And every night, after she fell asleep, he went to the basement and stared at the hammer. The waiting was sharpening him. One night, he sat in the dark living room, listening to the sound of Claire's shower upstairs. He pictured her standing there under the water, steam curling around her, completely unaware that her husband was rehearsing how to kill her. He imagined the weight of the hammer in his hand, the sound it would make, the way the light in her eyes would go out. He closed his eyes and smiled. Soon, the next morning, he was the perfect husband again. He made her breakfast, kissed her goodbye at the door. She thanked him, said she was lucky to have him. Ethan laughed softly when she was gone. Lucky, he repeated under his breath. Later that day, he returned to the basement. This time, he didn't just look at the hammer. He picked it up. He practiced holding it, swinging it slowly through the air. Not too hard, not too soft. Enough to make sure it would be quick. He stood in front of the wall, imagining Claire's head where the concrete was. The sound of the metal striking the wall echoed through the basement. Yes, that would do nicely. When he finally put the hammer down, his pulse was steady. There was no fear, no hesitation. The plan was ready. That night, as Claire slept beside him, Ethan whispered to the darkness, "Just one more day." He closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, he slept peacefully. The house was quiet when Ethan came home that evening. Claire was already there, humming softly as she cooked dinner. The sound used to comfort him. Now it grated on his nerves. "Hey, you're early," she said, smiling over her shoulder. "Yeah," Ethan said, setting his keys on the counter. "Thought I'd surprise you." They ate together, like any other night. She told him about work, about a co-worker's birthday party coming up, about a funny video she saw online. Ethan listened, nodding, smiling at all the right moments. Inside, he was counting down. After dinner, they watched TV for a while. Claire curled up against him on the couch, resting her head on his shoulder. Ethan felt her heartbeat against him and wondered if she could feel his steady, calm, deliberate. When it was time for bed, Claire kissed him softly. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night," Ethan said, staring at her in the dark. He waited. Minutes ticked by. Claire's breathing slowed, deepened. Ethan lay perfectly still, counting to 100 in his head. When he was sure she was asleep, he slowly slid out of bed. Barefoot, he padded down the hallway and opened the basement door. The hinges creaked softly, but Claire didn't stir. He descended into the darkness, heart thudding not from fear but anticipation. The hammer was waiting for him, right where he had left it. He picked it up, feeling the cool weight in his hand. The metal gleamed under the single bulb's light. This was it. He climbed back upstairs, careful not to make a sound. The house felt unreal, as if time itself was holding its breath. Claire was still asleep, turned on her side, one hand under her cheek. Ethan stood at the edge of the bed, watching her. For a long moment, he did nothing, just stood there, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing. Then he raised the hammer. The first blow was quick, precise. The sound was wet, final. Claire jerked once, a muffled gasp escaping her lips. The second blow silenced her completely. Ethan stood there, breathing evenly, staring at what he had done. The room was still, except for the faint drip of blood soaking into the sheets. He waited another moment, making sure. Then he lowered the hammer, wiped it on the blanket, and carefully set it aside. There was no panic, no rush. He went to the bathroom, turned on the shower, and washed the blood from his hands and arms. The water swirled red down the drain, then clear. When he was done, he put on clean clothes. Only then did he return to the bedroom. Claire's body lay still, her hair spread across the pillow. Ethan stared at her for a long time. "You shouldn't have lied to me," he said softly. He wrapped her in the blanket and dragged her body down the hallway, down the basement stairs. She was heavier than he expected, but Ethan didn't mind. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he lowered her onto the concrete floor. The basement was cold. The air smelled of earth and dust. He left her there for now, covering her with an old tarp. Tomorrow, he would take her to the well. He stood in the basement, breathing in the silence, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over him. For the first time in months, the house felt right. When he finally climbed back upstairs, he turned off the lights and went to bed. He slept soundly, dreamlessly, with a faint smile on his lips. Ethan woke up to sunlight streaming through the blinds. The house smelled faintly of coffee and toast. Claire had made breakfast as usual, only she wasn't there. He took a slow sip of coffee, pretending to be startled. "She's late," he muttered to himself, but his voice had no real worry in it. None of it was real. By mid-morning, he made the call to the police. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "Officer, my wife. She hasn't come home. I'm worried." Detective Miller arrived within the hour. Ethan greeted him at the door, shoes polished, shirt tucked in, the very picture of a concerned husband. Miller was in his 40s, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and an intuition that made Ethan uneasy, though he'd never show it. "Can you tell me exactly when you last saw her?" Miller asked, notebook in hand. Ethan's mind worked quickly, crafting each word. "Last night around 10. We watched some TV together. Then she went to bed. This morning, I made coffee, and she wasn't in the kitchen when I woke up." Miller nodded, scribbling notes. "Any friends or relatives she might have contacted?" Ethan thought for a second, lips pressed together. "Not that I know of. She seemed normal last night. No arguments, nothing unusual." Miller's gaze lingered on Ethan's face, sharp as a blade. "And you didn't hear anything unusual overnight?" "Nothing," Ethan said, shaking his head. His smile was soft, practiced. "Just the usual. Creaks in the floor, maybe a car outside." After Miller left to canvass the neighborhood, Ethan went about the house as if nothing were wrong. He straightened the living room, washed dishes, even wiped a few fingerprints from the hallway. Attention to detail mattered. He thought about Claire, lying in the basement under the tarp, and felt a strange satisfaction. She had been careless, but he was careful, always careful. By afternoon, neighbors had gathered, curious and concerned. Ethan smiled at each one, shared little anecdotes about Claire, painted her as a loving, kind woman who would never intentionally disappear. The performance was exhausting, but necessary. When Miller returned, he had questions. "We found some unusual security footage from a nearby store," he said. "Your car was seen leaving the house early this morning. Where were you?" Ethan's heart didn't skip a beat. He had already rehearsed this. "I went to the gas station and then the hardware store. Bought some things for the house. You know, cleaning supplies." Miller's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't press it. Not yet. Later, Ethan went down to the basement to check on Claire. The tarp smelled faintly of the earth and old paint. He ran a hand over it, making sure everything was in place. Soon, she would be gone forever. Evening came, and the house was still. Ethan sat on the couch, running through his alibi in his head. Every step he had taken, every receipt, every phone call, it all needed to align perfectly. One mistake, one missed detail, and it could all unravel. He imagined Miller poking through his life like a curious child, finding cracks. But there were no cracks. Not yet. Night fell, and Ethan made himself a late dinner. He listened to the rain tapping against the windows, a soft rhythm that matched the calculated beat of his own heart. When the lights went out, he checked the basement one last time. The shadows stretched across the concrete floor. Claire was still there, waiting for her final journey. Ethan smiled softly to himself. He climbed the stairs, turned off the lights, and went to bed. The house was quiet, but not for long. In the dark, Detective Miller sat in his car across the street. He had a feeling, a whisper of suspicion that refused to leave him. Ethan could not see him, could not know that the first threads of doubt were already weaving a net around him. And as Ethan slept, the storm of questions had already begun. Ethan woke to a restless mind. Sleep had been shallow, fractured by dreams of Claire's eyes staring at him from the darkness. The house was quiet, but quiet no longer meant peace. It meant waiting for something to go wrong. By mid-morning, he noticed the first cracks in his carefully constructed world. A neighbor mentioned seeing a strange car parked across the street the night before. A delivery driver had asked questions that had felt too personal. Small things, insignificant to anyone else, but to Ethan they were warnings. He checked the basement. Everything seemed as it should be. The tarp covering Claire smelled faintly of earth and dust, just as he had left it. But he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching him. He ran his hands along the concrete walls, tracing the familiar grooves, but it didn't calm him. It had never calmed him. Detective Miller returned that afternoon, his presence like a shadow Ethan could not shake. Miller's questions were casual, friendly even, but the eyes behind the words were sharp, probing. "Everything okay down here?" Miller asked, walking past Ethan into the basement. Ethan froze. The words, "okay down here," echoed in his mind. He smiled. "Yes, just organizing some old tools." Miller raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. Not yet. As the detective left, Ethan's hands trembled just slightly. He forced himself to take deep breaths. His plan had been meticulous, every step rehearsed. And yet, a growing sense of unease gnawed at him. He began to question the smallest details. Had he overlooked something? Had he left a trace? Later that evening, Ethan went to the basement again. He expected the familiar weight of the tarp, the familiar scent, the comforting thought that everything was under control. But the tarp felt wrong. He lifted it slowly. Claire was gone. Panic flared, hot and sudden, but Ethan forced it down, swallowing it like poison. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to wait for the final journey he had planned. But now she was gone. Ethan's mind raced, twisting possibilities. Had Miller been here? Had someone else found her? Was this some cruel trick of fate? Or had the house itself betrayed him? He retraced every step from the past 24 hours. Every movement, every detail, everything seemed perfect. And yet the evidence stared back at him. The empty space where Claire had been. He checked the windows, the back door, even the attic. Nothing. No sign of forced entry. No hint of movement. Nothing. The air in the basement felt heavier, thicker. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching and twisting as if alive. Ethan could hear faint whispers, the echo of Claire's voice, calling from somewhere deep in the dark. He pressed his hands to his head. The world tilted. Logic and reality collided in a blur. His mind, once razor-sharp, now spiraled into chaos. Was it possible? Could she? Could she be alive? Ethan had killed her, or had he? He didn't remember hesitation, didn't remember doubt. But the evidence, the empty basement, told a story his mind refused to reconcile. That night, he lay in bed beside the empty space where Claire had slept. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of wind through the blinds, was amplified, turning into a chorus of accusation. Sleep did not come. When dawn broke, Ethan went through the house again, methodically, obsessively. Every closet, every cabinet, every inch of the walls was inspected. Still nothing. Miller returned mid-morning, a letter of inquiry in hand. Somebody reported unusual activity last night near your property. He said casually, but the undertone was sharp, deliberate. Did you see anything? Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. No, nothing unusual. Just the usual night noises. Miller nodded, eyes narrowing. He left, but the sense of being watched lingered. Ethan's mind spun in circles, paranoia bleeding into reality. By nightfall, Ethan was trembling. He went down to the basement again, expecting to find the tarp, expecting to find Claire. Instead, the emptiness stared back. He whispered to himself, voice hoarse and shaking. I put her here. I killed her. But the words felt hollow, a mantra repeating in the dark. Ethan lit a single candle in the basement, the flickering flame casting grotesque shadows against the walls. He imagined Claire, her eyes wide, her mouth open, screaming silently. He couldn't remember if that image was memory or hallucination. He realized, with a cold, sinking certainty, that the walls were closing in, not physically, but mentally. The meticulous plan, the careful execution, the perfect alibi, all of it was unraveling before his eyes. The detective, the neighbors, the empty space, everything was a threat now. Everything was a trap. Ethan sank to the floor, candle in hand, staring into the shadows. The silence was deafening, and then he heard it, a faint creak above, like footsteps. He froze. Somebody was in the house. Somebody was watching. And suddenly, the perfect plan, the control he had clung to so desperately, was gone. Ethan woke in a cold sweat, the memory of last night's dreams lingering like a bitter taste in his mouth. Faces merged and shifted, Claire's, Miller's. Even his own reflected back at him with distorted expressions, mocking, accusing. The line between what was real and what was imagined had dissolved completely. He rose from bed, moving silently through the house. Everything seemed sharper now, the shadows, the creaks in the floorboards, the faint hum of the fridge. He felt like he was being watched, though he knew he was alone. Or was he? The basement called to him. Every instinct, every dark corner of his mind demanded that he check, that he confirm, that he relive it. He descended the stairs, hammer in hand, flashlight flickering. The tarp covering Claire's body had shifted. He swore it wasn't like that last night. His pulse quickened, anxiety laced with excitement, a paradox only he could feel. What's real? He whispered, tracing the tarp with trembling fingers. The concrete beneath it was cold, unforgiving. His mind raced through possibilities. Had Miller come? Had someone moved her? Or was he losing it entirely? The line between planning and obsession blurred. Ethan began rehearsing scenarios in his head. Miller finding evidence, neighbors asking questions, Claire somehow returning. He smiled at the thought. Each scenario was another thread in the web he had woven. Yet each thread threatened to unravel it all. Hours passed. Ethan wandered through the house, checking locks, scanning windows, listening for sounds that weren't there. Each creak, each whisper of wind, each flicker of shadow became a potential threat. He muttered to himself, names and accusations spilling out like poison. By evening, he was pacing the basement again, flashlight tracing the contours of walls he had memorized, hammer weighing heavily in his hand. The darkness felt alive, as if it breathed with him, as if it whispered secrets only he could understand. Then he heard it, a faint scraping above, footsteps, or merely a trick of his frayed nerves. Ethan's heart jumped, a shiver traveling down his spine. He lifted the hammer instinctively, ready to strike, but there was nothing. Silence, mocking silence. His mind fractured further. Memories and imaginations collided. He saw Claire's face staring at him from the shadows, heard her laughter echoing in the concrete. Miller's voice merged with hers, accusing, threatening. Ethan's grip on reality wavered. "I am in control," he whispered, gripping the hammer tighter. "I decide what is real. I decide what happens." He began rehearsing again. Every possible confrontation, every escape, every outcome. Miller would find nothing. He would leave no trace. Claire's disappearance was complete, perfect. Yet doubt persisted, gnawing at him like a relentless parasite. What if he had made a mistake? What if the world was conspiring against him? The thought of being caught, exposed, humiliated, sent a rush of adrenaline surging through him. He welcomed it. The fear sharpened his mind, made him more alert, more dangerous. Night fell. The house settled into an uneasy quiet. Ethan moved through it like a predator, checking every corner, ensuring his secrets remained hidden. He lit candles in the basement, their flickering light casting grotesque shadows that seemed to dance around him. He whispered to the darkness, "You will not find her. You will not find me. I am the master of this house. I am the master of this life." Hours later, he heard the faintest whisper of movement upstairs. Ethan froze, breath held. Could it be Miller? Could it be her? The possibility spun through his mind in endless spirals, each more terrifying than the last. He descended to the basement one final time that night. The tarp lay where it had always been, yet it seemed different, alive, waiting, watching. Ethan felt a thrill unlike anything he had ever known, a mix of fear and exhilaration. He spoke to the empty room, voice low and commanding. "Soon, everything will be clear. Soon, the truth will bow to me." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, rain pattering against the windows. Inside, Ethan's pulse raced with anticipation. The descent into madness was complete. He had crossed the threshold from calculation to chaos, from control to obsession. And in the shadows, the house seemed to agree, its silence whispering promises only he could hear. Ethan sat on the cold basement floor, hammer in hand, staring into the darkness. The line between hunter and hunted had disappeared, and as the night stretched on, he smiled, because he was ready. Ethan sat in the dark living room, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Sleep had abandoned him weeks ago, but tonight was different. Tonight, he felt a strange exhilaration. The final act was near. Detective Miller had grown bold. His questions had sharpened, his tone now probing and deliberate. Ethan felt the shadow of those questions pressing in, suffocating him. But that only made the thrill stronger. He had to act. The basement door creaked as he descended, hammer in hand, yet again imagining Claire, or what remained of her. But the emptiness that had haunted him for days had shifted. Something or someone had moved the pieces without his knowledge. Ethan's mind raced. Had Miller found her? Was it a trick? A hallucination? The lines between reality and fear had blurred beyond recognition. But he welcomed the chaos. He thrived on it. He set his plan in motion. Miller would not leave tonight without answers, and Ethan would ensure the detective received them in a way no one could ignore. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping against the windows like a drumbeat counting down to doom. Ethan lured Miller inside under the guise of cooperation, the detective stepping cautiously into the house, notebook in hand. "Mr. Carter, you insisted I come back tonight," Miller said, voice steady but wary. "I want to resolve this, your wife's disappearance." Ethan smiled, a slow, chilling curl of the lips. "Of course, detective. I want to help. Let's review the house." They moved room by room, Ethan guiding, Miller taking notes. Ethan's heartbeat was steady, calm, masking the storm inside. Every glance, every gesture was calculated. Every step forward was a trap. When they reached the basement, Ethan paused. The single bulb swayed above, casting long, jagged shadows against the walls. "This is where most of her things were," Ethan said, voice soft, deliberate. Miller stepped in, eyes scanning the room, noting the absence, the emptiness. And then he saw it, the tarp, slightly displaced. His pen hovered over the notebook. Ethan's mind raced. This was the moment. He had rehearsed it, visualized it countless times. He stepped closer, hammer raised. not to strike Claire, but to remind Miller of the control Ethan held in this house. "Detective," he whispered, voice low, hypnotic. "Sometimes the truth isn't what you expect." A flash of motion. Ethan lunged, swinging the hammer at the floor near Miller's feet. Miller flinched, but kept his balance. Ethan's smile widened. The room was chaos, shadows dancing on the walls like living things. Miller backed toward the stairs, heart racing. "Ethan, what have you done?" Ethan tilted his head. "What you think isn't always real." For a moment, time slowed. The air was thick with anticipation, the smell of damp concrete and fear mixing. Ethan could see Miller's doubt, the hesitation in his movements, the uncertainty that gave him power. Then, as if on cue, the basement lights flickered. The shadows shifted. A sound, faint but unmistakable, echoed from the far corner. Claire's voice? Or a trick of the mind? Ethan froze. Miller's eyes widened. Both men stared into the dark, the unknown stretching endlessly before them. The tarp shifted slightly. A movement, a whisper, a laugh. Ethan didn't know if it came from reality or the edges of his frayed sanity. Miller took a cautious step back. "Who's there?" No answer. Only the rain, the creaking walls, and the heavy silence that pressed against them like a living thing. Ethan lowered the hammer, almost reverently. "I told you she would never leave me," he said, voice barely above a whisper. A final flash of lightning illuminated the basement. Ethan's face was a mask of calm, but his eyes betrayed something darker, triumph, madness, and anticipation all at once. The scene ended not with resolution, but with questions. Who was still alive? Who had moved the body? And who, in the darkness, would be the last to laugh? The rain continued outside. The house seemed to breathe, waiting. And Ethan, alone with the shadows, smiled. The screen fades to black. Ethan's story may have reached a dark turning point tonight, but the shadows are far from over. What will happen next? Who's really in control? In the next episode, the line between hunter and hunted will blur even more, and secrets that have been hidden will start to surface. If this tale kept you on the edge of your seat, leave a comment with your theories. Hit the like button if the suspense gripped you. And don't miss what's coming next. There's much more waiting in the darkness.